So thank you very much, Dan. I'm joined by my colleagues in the House of Commons, Terry Beach, who's also the Parliamentary Secretary for Fisheries and Oceans and Canadian Coast Guard, and our friend and my colleague, Pamela Goldsmith-Jones, who is hugely devoted to the cause of wild salmon and wild salmon recovery, and has been a long-time champion for the Pacific Salmon Foundation and other groups. So Pamela, thank you for joining us. Mr. Beattie, what a pleasure to be in such a remarkable site. I never thought I'd be speaking to a group of journalists underneath the skeleton of a blue whale. But this is a remarkable facility and a testament to your generosity, that of your wife as well, but also your commitment to biodiversity and your lifelong passion, certainly for Pacific salmon. And that's what brings us here today. Mike, a privilege to be here with you as well. And Jim, thank you for the work that you do as well in chairing the board. I'm very glad to be here at the University of British Columbia, and particularly fitting, as I said a minute ago, to be at the Beattie Biodiversity Museum. I'm joined by our Deputy Minister from Ottawa, Catherine Blewett, who's with me, the Regional Director General for British Columbia for the Pacific region. Rebecca from our department is also here as well. Across the country, the ocean is central to our heritage and identity as Canadians. Here in British Columbia and your magnificent province, the 5 species of wild Pacific salmon and the southern resident killer whales are not only iconic species, but are central elements of the identity of British Columbia and British Columbians. Indigenous peoples of the coast have served as stewards of British Columbia's waters for thousands of years. Today, there are more demands than ever on our oceans. It is therefore vital that we protect them in a way that ensures environmental sustainability, safe and responsible commercial use, and that this happens in collaboration with coastal communities and Indigenous peoples whose livelihood often depends on the sustainable use of our oceans. The Government of Canada is committed to protecting our oceans, is backing up that commitment with a historic investment in ocean protections, $1.5 billion announced by the Prime Minister just a little less than a year ago in November here in Vancouver. This plan involves obviously working with provinces and territories, Indigenous peoples, industry, environmental organizations, and a host of other partners to better protect our coasts and waterways in the Pacific, in the Arctic, and in the Atlantic as well. As part of the Ocean Protections Plan, I announced the creation of a new $75 million Coastal Restoration Fund when I was in British Columbia and Victoria a few months ago. Over the next 5 years, we will use this fund to invest in the preservation, protection, and restoration of Canada's coastal areas. Like many other aspects of the Oceans Protection Plan, this fund facilitates and supports partnerships that are so important and essential to protecting oceans for future generations. And that's what brings us here today to this remarkable facility on the UBC campus. For the past 30 years, the Pacific Salmon Foundation has dedicated itself to the conservation and the restoration of wild Pacific salmon and their natural habitats in this province, in British Columbia, and in Yukon as well. The foundation is a strong and very effective advocate for salmon and has worked extremely hard, and I think very effectively, to guide the sustainable future of wild Pacific salmon and their habitat, both locally in this province, but internationally as well. They know that strong scientific information is the foundation for the conservation of wild Pacific salmon here in British Columbia, and to that end, the Pacific Salmon Foundation has developed an important tool under their Salmon Watersheds program. The Pacific Salmon Explorer is a customized online data visualization tool that provides a deep understanding of existing information about salmon populations and habitat. This tool supports evidence-based decision-making by tracking biological data for all 55 distinct salmon populations in the Skeena River watershed and making information about human and environmental pressures affecting salmon and their habitats accessible and transparent to the public. This is a very effective tool and was developed originally for the Skeena River watershed, but can obviously be extended to other watersheds throughout the province as well. So today, here with my colleagues Terry Beach and Pamela Goldsmith-Jones, I'm pleased to announce that the Government of Canada will contribute $1.2 million from the Coastal Restoration Fund to the Pacific Salmon Foundation over the next 3 years to allow it to expand the scope of the Pacific Salmon Explorer tool. The Pacific Salmon Foundation will expand the use of this very effective tool to 2 other important salmon-bearing watersheds in the Fraser River and key tributaries, as well as other major rivers that feed into the Strait of Georgia and the west coast of Vancouver Island. The goal is to identify priority areas for coastal restoration and help inform strategies to reduce threats and pressures that may be affecting important salmon populations like the southern British Columbia Chinook. This initiative will help advance key objectives of the wild salmon policy by restoring sockeye salmon stocks in the Fraser River, helping to fulfill a key recommendation of the Cohen Commission. Another result from the Salmon Explorer will be a contribution to recovery efforts for many other marine species as well, including threatened and endangered northern and southern resident killer whales, which rely obviously on an abundance of salmon as their primary food source. We all understand the importance of salmon conservation, and the protection and health of our waterways cannot be tackled in isolation. Partnerships like this one between our government and the Pacific Salmon Foundation, which has, as I said a minute ago, huge credibility and a hugely successful track record in this province and frankly globally, will strengthen our work as a government on habitat management, conservation, and restoration. We look forward to continuing also a close collaboration with academic partners, like some here at the University of British Columbia, with Indigenous communities and other stakeholders, and of course the provincial and territorial governments. Speaking of collaboration, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the Beatty Biodiversity Museum and the UBC Faculty of Science for their partnership with the Pacific Salmon Foundation to help advance the shared objectives of researching and restoring wild Pacific salmon. Our government is firmly committed to fostering collaboration on oceans protection, and it's my belief that this is only the first of a number of significant partnerships with the Pacific Salmon Foundation, Mike, that I look forward to announcing with you and your colleagues who've done such remarkable work in the coming weeks and months. In fact, tomorrow I will be speaking at the Southern Resident Killer Whale Symposium, which will bring together Indigenous groups, scientists, the marine industry, and other governments to seek solutions to better protect this iconic species, not only for British Columbians, but for all Canadians. I think it's important to note that our government will do what is necessary and take whatever measures are necessary to ensure not only the survival of the southern resident killer whale population, but also assist in the recovery of this iconic species, so important to the imagination of so many Canadians. So I want to conclude by thanking the Pacific Salmon Foundation for their ongoing and remarkable work in protecting wild Pacific salmon, and for their dedication and effective work also on behalf of protecting marine habitats. Decades from now, I think that our children and grandchildren will inherit an environment that must necessarily include healthy, productive, and prosperous oceans and the communities along the coasts that depend on our oceans. So the work that you're doing today and the work that the Government of Canada can do in partnership with you, I think is one important step on this shared journey. But as I said, I hope it's the first of many investments we can make in partnership with the Foundation, because we value so much the work you've done, and we think it's one of the most effective ways to ensure the protection of wild salmon, something that our government's committed to doing, but it'll be made a lot easier and more effective if we have the collaboration of groups like the Pacific Salmon Foundation and groups like Wild Salmon Forever. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.